Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland, and here I am in London on Regent Place. Behind me is the house where Frances Hodgson Burnet spent some of the latter part of her life. So she was born Frances Hodgson in Manchester. Now Frances is one of those androgynous names. It was spelled with an E-S, it's a woman's name, an I-S, it's a boy's name. So her father was a successful ironmonger, and they had servants. It mightn't seem like a middle-class job, but back then it was. And her mother also came from a well-to-do family in Manchester. However, Frances, when she was only 3, her father died, and that led to a financial declension for her family. She was the middle of 5 children. Anyway, so she went to a school run by some local women, a dame school as it was called, which I think they ran for profit, and that was thought to be not quite as good as a school run by men. Having women teach little children was all right, but they mustn't teach teenagers because they couldn't be clever enough. That would have been the 19th century view. Anyway, when she was about 16, they emigrated to the United States, and they went to live in Kentucky. I can't remember the name of the town, but what was nowhere very big. Anyway, so her sisters and brothers got married in short order, and to make ends meet, Frances Burnet, as she then was, or Hodgson as she then was, she began writing stories and then published in local magazines. There was much more of an appetite for that sort of thing back then because, of course, there was no radio, much less television or internet, so people had to read for leisure. And obviously more and more people were becoming literate in the United States. In the southern part of the United States, only about 50% of whites could read. It was rather higher in the north. People had more of an attention span because they'd not been conditioned to have none as we are today. Anyway, she knew a young man, a Mr. Burnet, who lived close by, Swan Burnet, Swan being his Christian name, oddly, and they become friends when she was a teenager because he had something wrong with his leg and couldn't participate in sports and things like that. I think it was just temporarily, but there doesn't appear to be anything romantic between them at first. But he went off to qualify as a doctor. They eventually married. She'd ordered a wedding dress from miles away. It was even from another country. It did not arrive on time, and she wanted to postpone their wedding because she simply had to get married in the right gown. But he said he couldn't wait a minute longer because those days respectable girls stayed very firmly out of the bedroom until they're married. Maybe that's why he couldn't wait a minute longer. Anyhow, so they married and they had 2 sons. The first one appearing about a year after their wedding. So it was a happy marriage, and she began publishing more and more books, so just established herself as a full-time authoress as well as this upper middle class housewife. And her most famous work by far is Little Lord Fauntleroy. It's published in 1885. It's set in New York City. So there's Errol, isn't that his name? This boy who's got not very much money. His father's died. His father was British, his mother's American. The boy's born in the United States, and then they suddenly get the news that various distant relatives in the UK have died, leaving him heir to this title, which he never knew about. And so he becomes Lord Fauntleroy, and his British grandfather sends for him, who he's never met, and says he's got to be brought up in the right manner. But Lord Fauntleroy is a bit too precious and has to be dressed in these like satin suits, and he has these golden ringlets clinging around the nape of his neck and so on. So he's perhaps a bit too effete. But anyway, it was wildly popular at the time. It was turned into a play. So Frances Hodgson Burnet, she was lionized by New York society. So she published a number of other novels. She thought that wasn't terribly serious. Was happy with the money, but somewhat regretted just how successful it was, overshadowed a work of hers which was a worthier part of her oeuvre. Anyway, so she came back and spent quite a lot of time in the United Kingdom. So she'd struggled with melancholia throughout her life, and one of her sons died when he was about 12. Her other son, Vivian, went to Harvard. I don't know what he did later on. But her depression wasn't completely mad because she was down in the dumps for a good reason, as in her child had died. What's next? So, after 20-something years of marriage, her husband passed away. So she's a very wealthy woman, lived independently both here, travelled extensively through Europe, published a number of historical novels set in the Middle Ages, 17th century and so on, often about the upper orders. The fact that main character in Little Lord Fauntleroy had started out working class and ended up very wealthy was just the kind of story that Americans slapped up. It's a bit like Benjamin Franklin's work, but then again, Benjamin Franklin did it through dint of effort. This boy, it was simply happenstance. It was this serendipitous bereavement which elevated him from the proletariat to the lordly. So back to Frances Hodgson Burnet. Yeah, she met a man who was like 10 years younger than her, who'd helped around a bit, kind of been her secretary, and she eventually married him, so that caused a lot of tart gossip in the newspapers, like that she was a man-eater or something, or a cougar would say these days. So she lived till the age of 74. She died sometime in the 1920s, would have been 1924, I think, yeah. Hadn't quite reached her 75th birthday in the United States where she's buried. I don't remember where, actually. So that's her. You can obviously tell that, you know, she was not short of a few pennies to be living here on Portland Place. I mean, look at the size of the place. So, this is her door. I mean, it's now a school. It goes over there, up towards the next door, and obviously is quite deep, goes quite far back. Anyway, that's just a little bit about Frances Hodgson Burnet. Toodaloo.